Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the True Cost of Economic Security webinar. True Cost of Economic Security, What It Takes for Children to Thrive webinar. I'm Jennifer Jones-Austin. I'm the chair of the National True Cost of Living Coalition, and I'm the executive director, CEO, and executive director of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. Today's webinar is being recorded, and it's going to be shared with everyone who registered after the webinar. As we move through the webinar, you may have questions. At the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. Please use the Q&A box to present your questions. Do not use the chat. Use the Q&A box to present your questions, and we'll aim to answer them following the formal presentation. Now, to formally open up our webinar, I'm honored to present to you a key partner in this groundbreaking work, Laura King. Lauren King is a program officer for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and in this role, she supports the foundation's systems change efforts to promote thriving children, working families, and equitable communities. She identifies and nurtures opportunities to affect positive systemic change within communities, executes programming efforts, and works closely with other staff at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation to ensure the integration and coordination of initiatives. Before joining the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Lauren led workforce initiatives at the Greater New Orleans Foundation and Delgado Community College, where she brought together philanthropy, city government, and grassroots partners to build pathways to economic security and wealth. She's nationally recognized for her leadership in the field and was named a Workforce Leadership Fellow by the Aspen Institute. We're honored to have Lauren with us today. Lauren?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Good morning and good afternoon to those joining from other time zones, and welcome. I am truly honored to be here in support of FPWA and this important work. I began my own learning journey with FPWA nearly 3 years ago when the team presented a very compelling case for rethinking the official poverty measure. And as many of you know, this outdated metric is still used to determine eligibility for critical social safety net programs such as SNAP, Medicaid, TANF, as well as access to job training opportunities. Because these programs are tied to a measure that no longer reflects the true cost of living, families often find themselves at risk of losing essential supports like childcare, healthcare, and even opportunities for workforce training, when it is clear that they still need these resources both to strive and survive. At the Kellogg Foundation, our mission is to create the conditions in which all children can thrive. And by supporting working families and building equitable communities, Kellogg works to do just that. This work of FPWA is deeply aligned with those values. It's about improving economic opportunity and financial security for the families that we care so deeply about. So once again, I'm grateful to be in partnership with FPWA and to support this critical and timely effort. So before I toss it back to our MC, I'd like to give her a formal introduction. Jennifer Jones-Austin is the Executive Director and CEO of FPWA. She is an author, a public speaker, a radio host who has led transformative changes in social policy and law to uplift marginalized communities. She chaired the nation's first New York City Racial Justice Commission, spearheading 3 historic charter amendments to embed racial equity in city governance, and led the New York City Board of Correction in ending solitary confinement in city jails. Jennifer serves as vice chair of the National Action Network, co-chair of the National True Cost of Living Coalition, and commissioner on the New York State Community Commission on Reparations Remedies. Jennifer is also a founding member of the New York State 400 of African American History Commission and serves on advisory boards at Fordham University, at Feerick Center for Social Justice and Harvard's Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior. Once again, please join me in welcoming Ms. Jennifer Jones Austin. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very kind and lengthy introduction of me. I'm very appreciative, and I'll just quickly say that, like all of us on this webinar this afternoon, I'm just trying to show up and do the work that I'm called and purposed to do. So thank you, Lauren, and thank you for being with us today. Thank you for making this initiative possible. And I want to thank everybody who's joined in today for being here and opening up their ears to hear about this critical initiative and this undertaking. For those who weren't here when we first came on, I'm Jennifer Jones Austin, as Lauren just shared, and I'm going to be the MC. Today, we're going to present to you a new, unprecedented, cutting-edge measure that provides critical data and analysis about the economic well-being of Americans, the true cost of economic security measure, abbreviation TCES. As you learn about the measure, I hope it prompts questions, and so I want to remind you to drop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And our game plan is that after the formal presentation, we'll get to the Q&A and we'll answer as many questions as we possibly can. So let's get to it. As many of you on this webinar know, raising children to reach their full potential in America costs a lot of money. There are typical family household costs, the costs that we're all well aware of: housing, food, transportation, and healthcare. And all of these costs increase with every child and with each child and with inflation. Now, there are additional essential costs, expenses that families incur for critical needs, such as after-school programs, summer camp, educational supports, college savings, clothing, and more. And for so many Americans, too many Americans, millions of Americans, the cost of raising children today is darn near cost prohibitive. It's just, it's more than they can afford. In the last 20 years, costs have risen 66%, but the resources to pay for these costs, wages and other resources, have only risen 2%. 66%, over 20 years in terms of the cost rising, but the resources to meet those costs rising during this same period of time by only 2%. Across America, families with children are grappling with this conundrum. This financial pressure is not a fringe issue. It's a mainstream issue, with the majority of households, 59%, reporting that they are struggling to stay afloat financially. However, too many of these families aren't seen, and their struggle isn't seen because conventional government measures, as Lauren talked about, measures of need, are centered on extreme hardship, what families need by way of resources and income supports just to get by. As a result, many low-income and even middle-income families are not being seen, and their financial stress is not being seen. It's not being addressed. Since 1969, our government has used the official poverty measure to estimate what families need to cover their household expenses. The official poverty measure, OPM, calculates the national average of a family's food costs, with family sizes and ages as the key variables, and multiplies that amount by 3. But this approach is dangerously out of touch with 21st century financial realities, where essential costs such as housing and childcare are not factored in. Since 1950, childcare expenses have more than tripled, outpacing wages, groceries, and even housing. In some cases, childcare equals 70%, nearly 70% of a family's housing costs, making it the second largest household expense. Childcare is not the only additional cost. Families also face increased housing, food, and everyday household expenses such as clothing. Beyond these, there are essential investments required to raise children to their full potential, far beyond the bare minimum. In 2025, the official poverty measure estimates that for a family of 4 with 2 adults and 2 children, it costs just $32,150. In counties across this nation, The actual annual cost of living for a family of this size and composition is significantly higher. Recognizing that it's impossible to thoroughly address and solve problems and challenges that we do not see, that we do not measure, FPWA, my organization, with the generous support of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, partnered with the Community Service Society and launched the National True Cost of Living Coalition. And in April 2023, I should say it was maybe, I can't remember, it was 2023, I can't remember the actual month. The coalition commissioned the Urban Institute to develop the first national true cost of economic security measure. The coalition, comprised of policy experts, practitioners, economists, and advocates, pursued this work because we know from on-the-ground engagement, much like many of the practitioners on this Zoom, we know that on-the-ground engagement teaches us that families, both low and increasingly middle-income families, are having a hard time getting by, getting ahead, and staying ahead. The TCES measure, just out for a short little while, just since November 2024, has been recognized as the first of its kind because it is based on economic security, not acute deprivation, and it incorporates key costs not included in any other measure of economic well-being here in America. As I just shared, released in November 2024, it's now being utilized in policy discussions at the local, state, and federal levels to spotlight the growing number of economically insecure families and the rising costs, resource gaps, and demographic variables contributing to their financial struggles. Just last May, as congressional debates were getting underway concerning the proposed sweeping reductions to social programs, including Medicaid and SNAP, the coalition held a Capitol Hill briefing for members of Congress and their staff and used the TCES to forecast the consequences that would result for millions of Americans whose healthcare, food, housing, and childcare are now in jeopardy. And in June, this past June, during a House Ways and Means Committee hearing, Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin, a zealous advocate for economic security and for the work of TCES, referenced TCES in her questioning of former Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. In New York City, the Independent Budget Office recently used borough level. Here in New York City, we have 5 boroughs, 5 counties. The Independent Budget Office used TCES data to more accurately assess how the city can better target resources to public schools where the students and their families are experiencing economic hardship. The measure has been referenced in articles and opinion pieces in a variety of publications, ranging from the National Public Radio and Bloomberg, New York Magazine, The Hill, to the Reno Gazette Journal and the Capitol Press. And researchers from the New School have used it to discuss housing shortages and affordable housing solutions, while others are using it to evaluate the impact of tariffs on higher food insecurity. So what does the TCES tell us? Some key findings. It tells us that 52% of Americans are economically insecure, not poised to thrive. It tells us that 80% of individuals in single-parent families fall below the true cost of economic security threshold. For example, a single parent with 2 children needs an estimated $96,000 to be economically secure. But the reality is that they have median resources of only $58,300. The TCES tells us that deep racial disparities persist. 67% of Black individuals and 71% of Hispanic individuals, compared to 42% of non-Hispanic white individuals, are economically insecure. Economic insecurity is a coast-to-coast issue, with some states hit harder than others. Rates of economic insecurity range from a low of 47% in the Midwest to a high of 57% in the West, and are slightly lower for those living in metro areas than for those in non-metro areas. 51 to 40, 51 to 54%. The introduction of a single child adds significant annual costs to a household budget. Median costs increased by roughly $19,000 for a single adult with one child, from $58,000 to $77,800. A second child adds another $18,000. Even two adults bear high costs, with one child raising costs to $121,000 compared to $103,500 for households without children. Over the long term, the true cost of economic security measure will shift the conversation here in America from what Americans need not just to survive, but to truly thrive. The shift to an economic security paradigm demands that government look more closely at households and families' financial struggles and use the data to inform policy that would materially, positively impact their circumstances. Now you're going to hear more about the methodology and the detailed findings from my colleague at the Urban Institute, Gregory Osh. Greg Osh is Vice President for Tax and Income Supports Division he's Vice President for the Tax and Income Supports Division at the Urban Institute, where his research focuses on social insurance, social welfare, and the compensation of workers. His team at the Urban Institute developed the True Cost of Economic Security measure in partnership with our coalition. I'm honored to hand the conversation over to Greg.
Thank you, Jennifer. Developing a measure like the true cost of economic security was a team effort, and we're grateful to FPWA and CSS for funding our work. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Linda Generelli, Ilhan Derry, and Margaret Todd, our programming team, and our lived experience team that all came together to develop this measure. Next slide, please. So our goal in developing the true cost of economic security measure was to determine what a family needs, not just to meet its most basic needs, but to be secure, financially resilient, and poised to thrive. And to do this, we had to capture the costs as comprehensively as we could that families need to meet, as well as the resources that they have. Now, a one-size-fits-all measure wasn't going to work. We needed the costs to vary by location. We know that costs vary considerably depending on where you live around this country, and by family type. Larger families, families with kids, have more needs than smaller families, families without children. We wanted to build it using high quality, publicly available data so that others could replicate it and or modify it for their own specific geographies if they had other programs that aren't that prominent nationally, but they use locally to support families. And we also wanted it to be grounded in the experience of people in the US. So we didn't just write up this measure and put it out. We took it to a panel of a lived experience panel and asked them, does this resonate? Do these costs make sense? Do these resources make sense? Does the experience speak to your experience? And so we feel very good about grounding this measure in people's experience. Next slide, please. And we also want this measure to be used. We think it can be used to identify who across the country is struggling and what the source of their struggling is. What are the expenses that they're struggling to meet? What are their resource constraints? And we want to help policymakers at all levels of government identify the policies, practices, and programs that empower families and help them meet the true cost of economic security. Next slide, please. So how did we do it? I'm going to go through spend some time talking about how we built this measure. I'm going to talk first about what costs we captured and how we captured them, what resources we're accounting for families and how we measured them. We developed thresholds by different types of families and by place. We compute the TCES rates, that is the share of people who are struggling for people in different circumstances. And this is the first time we did it. When we started this endeavor, the best available data was for the year 2022. So I'll be talking about circumstances in 2022. We do not have a time trend. We are about to update for 2023, but the data that I'm presenting will reflect 2022. Next slide, please. Now, we didn't start from scratch completely. There have been attempts to measure self-sufficiency in the cost of living. And, best known is probably the United Way's Alice work and the MIT Living Wage Calculator. And we looked at all these different measures and saw what costs they were capturing and how they were capturing them and how they were counting resources if they were counting resources. And we picked and chose and tweaked to come up with our true cost of economic security measure that I think does a really good job of capturing more types of costs than we've seen in other measures, and also takes advantage of the Urban Institute's microsimulation modeling, which lets us do a more comprehensive description of resources that are available. So with that, next slide, please. So let's start talking about costs. So the first cost we considered was housing costs. And to set the threshold for what does a family have to pay for housing, we went to HUD and used fair market rents, but we didn't just take the fair market rents as determined by HUD. We wanted to make sure the housing situation wasn't crowded, and we wanted to ensure that children of opposite sexes as they got older had their own bedrooms. So we base it on fair market housing, but the number of bedrooms we allocate for families, especially larger families, may be slightly larger. Food, everyone's got to eat. As Jennifer pointed out, the the official poverty line is based on food, specifically the cost of the thrifty food plan. We wanted to bump up slightly higher because we're not talking about subsistence. We're talking about being poised to thrive and being economically secure. So we used the USDA's low-cost food plan rather than thrifty food plan to identify food costs. And then we used Feeding America's Meet the Meal Gap data to adjust those costs county by county. Health insurance is a huge cost for people. Now, people don't always know what their health insurance costs are, especially if they're on Medicaid or Medicare, or if their employer is providing health insurance to them, even if they have some copay or premium share. So to identify healthcare costs, we went to the ACA marketplace and took the value of the second lowest silver plan. And that's how we set health insurance costs, and varies by place. In addition, it's more than just health insurance. Families have out-of-pocket costs. And what we were able to do is get an average out-of-pocket cost estimate from the current population survey and impute it onto our families in the data that we used. So we're capturing both insurance costs and out-of-pocket healthcare costs. For childcare costs, we use the median cost of center-based care using data from the Department of Labor. For transportation costs, we use the average cost of car ownership and public transportation for families at 80% of area median income from the Housing and Transportation Survey. Technology, hard to function in society these days without a cell phone. And work without broadband in many cases. So we wanted to reflect the cost. We have a fixed cost for broadband and cell phone based on the number of people in the family over age 12. It doesn't vary from place to place, however. Taxes owed. Now, many data will show net taxes. We have taxes owed on the cost side. We will put in tax credits on the resource side. We have the ability to do federal and state tax calculations in our modeling. And so that's what we did. A lot of families live with debt. And it's difficult to capture all forms of debt, but what we were able to do is focus in on student debt. And using data from Debt in America at the county level, we were able to assign debt service, how much people are paying per year in student loan payments at the county level. So based on where you live, for the proper share of people in the county who had student debt in that age range, we assigned the average student debt payment for people in that county. There are a whole bunch of other expenses that families have to pay for: clothes, self-care, cleaning supplies, public engagement. And we looked at what families are spending in the consumer expenditure survey, and varying by family size and 4 geographic regions, we were able to assign those costs. And finally, you always have to save for a rainy day. You're going to have to save for your kids' education. You're going to have to save for retirement. So we put in a savings target, and we set it at 10% of all your other costs. Why 10%? Well, one, it's a round number, but also that way in 5 years, you will have built up about 6 months of expenses. And that's what people suggest you save for have on hand for emergency expenses. So next slide, please. Okay, we got the costs, then we have the resources. And for resources and for our analysis, we relied on data from the American Community Survey, but with adjustments using the Urban Institute's ADIS microsimulation model. Essentially, what the ADIS model allows us to do is adjust for underreporting of certain types of income that we know are underreported in survey data, more specifically, public assistance resources such as SNAP, WIC, TANF, and what have you. So the resources we count are your annual earnings, your positive self-employment income, interest, dividends, and rent, pension income and distribution from retirement accounts, social insurance, both cash and in kind if it's close to cash, child support received, your tax credits, child tax credit, earned income tax credit. And then for 2 areas specifically, for health insurance, it's hard to know, put a value on Medicaid, Medicare, or what your employer is spending on your behalf for your health insurance. So what we did is said, well, we have a cost based on the ACA plan. If you have health insurance from a public source or an employer, we're going to give you resources to just completely offset that cost. So that's how we're covering your health insurance costs. For childcare, if you have kids under age 12, you have a childcare cost, but some families have non-working adults in addition to a working adult who are, doing home production. They're taking care of their kids. And so if there is a second, third, or fourth adult in the family who is not working, who is able to provide childcare, we take the childcare cost and value that labor at the cost. So a family who has an extra adult who can provide childcare, we count that in resources at the same level as the cost of childcare. A lot there. Next slide, please. So when we put it all together, we can see what costs these families face and what resources they have. So this is specifically for families with children, and all the adults in the family are under age 65. So you can see at the bottom, housing on average, median cost is a little over $18,000 a year. Healthcare cost is the largest single cost item for these families at over $20,000 a year. Food comes close to $13,000 a year. Transportation, $15,500. Childcare, $11,400. Their savings target is $12,300. Their tax liabilities add up to just under $16,000. Every other category that I didn't itemize comes in at around just under $19,000. And now again, these are medians, so medians don't all add up like means, but the total comes close. That families with kids, their true cost of economic security is about $135,000. Compare that to the resources that they have. Median resources for these families, $121,000. So on net, we find that 58% of people living in families with children have resources that fall below the true cost of economic security. Let's go to the next slide. Let's focus on two specific types of families: three-generation families and families with children and student debt. So in a three-generation family, you have someone over age 65, a working age adult, and at least one child. So you can see that their total costs are appreciably higher than a typical family with kids, and no folks that are elderly. They have higher housing costs, much higher healthcare costs, because older folk have higher healthcare costs. And on net, we see that, sorry, um, total costs, median costs for people in these families is about 170,000. They also have higher resources than a typical family with children, largely because people over age 65 have Social Security. They have Medicare. So on average, the median resources for three-generation families is around 160,000. Overall, the TCES rate for people in three-generation families is 56%, about the same as for all families and kids with kids. Next, let's turn to families with student debt. You may have noticed that the median family didn't have student debt. That's not surprising. So focusing on families with student debt, we can see that that level of student debt is about $2,000. And overall, thank you. Overall, the cost, the true cost of economic security threshold for these families is around 144,000, just a little bit higher than for all families with kids. But you can also see that their resources are slightly higher, also around $144,000. And what that reflects is that people who have student debt are also likely to have more education and hence higher earnings. So on average, the TCS rate for families with children and student debt is 48%. Still about half families are in economically insecure. Next slide, please. So Jennifer alluded to some of these numbers in her presentation, looking at costs and resources by metro status. So people in cities and metro areas do have higher housing costs and higher costs overall than people in non-metro areas, but they also have higher resources. And so on net, the TCES rates don't vary that much, metro versus non-metro, 51% in metro areas, 54% in non-metro areas. Let's look at regional differences. Next slide, please. So again, you see that costs tend to be higher in the Northeast and in the West than in the rest of the country. In the Midwest, costs and resources kind of balance out. So the share of folks who are struggling for families with children and no adults over age 65 present, range from a low of 47%, just under half in the Midwest, to 57% in the West. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to focus on families in different demographics. So as Jennifer alluded to, kids are the most vulnerable. 61% of kids live in families whose resources fall below the true cost of economic security threshold. 3 in 5 kids. The rates for adults hover around 50%, 49% for working age adults, 47% for adults age 65 and over. Again, that reflects Social Security and Medicare supporting those families. Next slide, please. And then there are, of course, persistent racial and ethnic disparities. Black people and Hispanic people tend to have higher rates of economic insecurity than Asian Pacific Islanders and non-Hispanic white people. And these differences reflect long-standing structural factors that impact where people can live, as well as their work and schooling opportunities. And even further, even within a race and ethnic group, there can be considerable diversity in experiences and outcomes. Next slide, please. Finally, we wanted to better understand what differentiates places where a lot of people are struggling from places where a lot of people are secure. And to that end, we looked at the 100 largest counties in the US. These are the places where we have the most abundant and best data, most reliable data. And we compared the 5 counties with the highest rates, where most people are struggling, to the 5 counties with the lowest rates, where lots of people are economically secure. The range is quite large. In the places where people are struggling, 71% of the people are struggling. In places where people are doing better, 32% of people are struggling. And a couple of things you can see is that in the highest, um, in the places where people are struggling, housing costs are slightly higher. Overall, there's not a huge difference, however, in the total median costs faced by families in places where folks are struggling and places where folks are thriving. What is striking is how big a difference there is in median resources. Median resources are much higher in places where people are secure, over 172,000 in places where people are thriving, as compared with just over 100,000 in places where people are struggling. And most of the resources from these families come from market activities, largely what they earn from working. Next slide, please. So a couple of things to keep in mind as we wrap up. We're only talking about 2022. We do not know about trends. We are adding 2023. We hope to add 24, 25, 26, so we can see how things are changing. Opinions can reasonably vary about what are the precise cost thresholds. Is our housing threshold too high or too low? Is our childcare threshold too high or too low? Should we have used 75th percentile? Should we have used for childcare costs? Should we have used the cost for in-home care as opposed to center-based care? We hope that people use the data we have to make the adjustments. We also show ranges of where people fall relative to the true cost of economic security. And then finally, it is challenging to capture all the costs and resources that people have. We talked about debt and adding student debt, and that was a good innovation. There are other types of debt that people have to service that we would like to include. We talked about the value of public assistance being underreported, and we adjust that. We also know that pension income tends to be underreported. We haven't been able to adjust for that yet. And also, we know that some people have been in their houses for a long time. They have all the space they need, and their mortgage is less than what they would have to pay in rent. And so we want to capture that as well going forward. These are all things to keep in mind. But at the next slide, please. To wrap up, the key takeaways, the things we want you to keep in mind are that half of all people are economically secure based on our measure. Really brings visibility and data to what we see as a lot of people feeling they're not poised to thrive, even if they feel like they're getting by. Families with children are particularly vulnerable. It is expensive to raise kids. Places with higher proportions of people who are struggling don't have particularly high costs. Rather, the resources are low. So overall, affordability is a problem. It is a challenge for all of us, and bringing down costs, particularly high cost items like housing, healthcare, childcare, will help reduce family struggles and make more areas more affordable for more people. But being economically secure is more than just about bringing down costs. It's also about increasing family resources, and that's going to be crucial if we want more people to be secure and poised to thrive. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Cannot overstate how significant has been the work of the Urban Institute and Greg and his team in making this measure a reality. And we owe a debt of gratitude to Greg and the team at the Urban Institute because this work is groundbreaking, it's transformative, and it will help us, those of us who are concerned about individuals, families, and communities that are vulnerable. It's going to help us to present the challenges that they experience in real time and make their needs known to our government. And it's going to greatly inform critical policy that strengthens the lives of individuals and families, and especially children. Two quick things I want to note that is important for you all to understand and appreciate. The results are based on 2022 data because we have to follow the data that is put forth by the federal government and by jurisdictions around the country. And so as we update it, it will follow the federal government data and other data. The other point to just keep in mind is that if you want to understand for comparison purposes, if for 2022 data, the economic insecurity rate for Americans was, I should say, to compare, let me say it differently. If we look at the official poverty measure, in 2022, we were told that the poverty rate for Americans was 11%, a little better than 11%. But the economic insecurity rate was 52%. What this measure helps us to appreciate is that many, many people are not being seen. And in turn, our policies are not really being responsive to their needs. So now we're going to go to Q&A. And to help us walk through the questions that have been presented, and there's still time if people want to add questions to the Q&A, do so. We have a few questions. But to bring the questions forward, I'm going to turn the conversation now over to Jared Launius, who's here at FPWA, and he's the campaign manager for the National True Cost of Living Coalition. Jared?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much, Jennifer. We really appreciate everyone submitting questions. Folks have been submitting them in the Q&A during this webinar. And we also know that some folks submitted questions when they were registering for this event. And we really appreciate that in advance. We tried to, I think, address a lot of the questions that were received through registration to make sure that our panelists were able to address those. But there's a few questions from the registration that we wanted to lift up as we kick off our Q&A here. So Randy, when he registered, asked, how can we localize the TCES measure to study and empower every community in America? So Jennifer, Greg, I don't know if either of you want to speak to sort of the value of this measure in the way that communities can potentially use it to understand economic security in their community and utilize the measure to make better policy.
Greg, would you like to share a little bit about the data and how it's collected at the county level? First. You're on mute.
Sometimes my answers are better if I'm on mute, but we use the data at the best quality at the lowest level of aggregation we can find. So for the American Community Survey data, where we get the demographic information and the resource information, for larger counties where the sampling unit is made up of, there are multiple sampling units in the county, or the county is a sampling unit, we have fairly good data. For our counties with much smaller populations, sometimes we have to take the balance of the state, and that gives us the resources on the resource side. The different the different cost measures, the fair market rents are down at the county level. We have that for health insurance costs. If the plans vary by geography geography within a state, we capture that. Otherwise, the variation is just at the state level. For the miscellaneous expenses, the geographic variation is just regions. And then for broadband costs, we can't do that at the local level. So it depends. So we go to the county level when we can. When we can't go to the county level, we go to the state level. We can't do the state, we go to regional. If we can't do regional, then we take a national number.
And I'll just add that given that we have this level of data at the local level, you can lean in and then look at your county and how your county's faring, how your state is faring, and use that to inform your policy and advocacy work about who's struggling and what are the pressure points. And so what we're encouraging is that individuals and families, individuals and institutions become as familiar with the measure as they possibly can, and then use the data and the analysis to inform their advocacy activities.
Thanks very much, Jennifer and Greg. Another question that was asked in the registration process, Juliana asked, are you aware of any efforts to quantify the costs of benefits families will lose access to as a result of the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill Act? So I know that the Urban Institute has done some research on this. Greg, would you like to sort of share at a high level the work that the Urban Institute has done? And I know that you shared a link with me that I will drop into the chat.
Sure. On Urban Institute's website, and Jared will share a link, we have a resource page of the collection of all the work we did to try to cost down and project the impact of the Reconciliation Act as it was going through iterations and changes through the during the debate up through July 4th when it was passed. And the long and the short of it is it's not good for lower income families by and large. And we have breakdowns of who benefits on the tax side. Understanding the impact of the changes to the SNAP program are fairly complex because if we start taking money away from states, we're not sure how they will respond in terms of benefits. And then the healthcare coverage changes in Medicaid, the additional work requirements will probably end up reducing the share of lower income folks who get Medicaid, whether those are kids or families with disabilities. As far as it speaks to the true cost of economic security, again, these are data for 2022. The changes we're seeing in the Reconciliation Act will roll out over time, 25, 20, 26, 27. So it's not there yet, and it won't be in the 2023 update that should be out at the end of the year. But I will note that one of the things that wasn't in the act is the expiration of the premium tax credits for folks who are buying health insurance through exchanges. And that loss of resources, those tax credits, are probably going to affect families that are close to the economic security line. So wasn't in the bill. It's something that Congress may be discussing now to avoid the shutdown. But the ending of those premium subsidies for people buying insurance on the exchanges may impact the share of families falling below the economic security line.
I'll quickly add that here in New York City, as we look at the big, beautiful bill and the changes that will result for SNAP benefits, Medicaid, and more, what we've done is here at FPWA, our fiscal policy team has looked at the flow of federal funds to New York City communities, nonprofits, individuals, and families, and has provided estimates of how these communities, as well as the agencies providing critical services, our Administration for Children's Services, which oversees child care and child welfare, the Human Resources Administration, the Department of Youth and Community Development, responsible for after-school programs, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, which administers Medicaid and Medicare and other health care programs. We've looked at what the impact will be. And you can visit the FPWA website at www.fpwa.org to see what the impact is estimated to be here in New York City.
Thanks very much. I want to lift up a question that a few folks have asked a few different versions of here in the Q&A. Rashida and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this name, but Hazaifa both asked a question that I think is very similar. So I'll lift it up for you. How do you develop buy-in for using these new metrics? Folks understand that the federal government is using metrics that are, as have been discussed, outdated or grounded in a different standard. And so the question is, how do you develop buy-in and get folks to utilize these measures in making decisions?
Greg, would you like to take it from the kind of the policy and the research vantage point, and then I'll talk about the how do you engage people?
Sure. So from the research side, there are a number of scholars who work in the space of poverty measurement and the measurement of well-being. And we spoke with them as we were developing the measure. We took recommendations that were put forth in the National Academy of Science report on the new primary poverty measure, which should improve the supplemental poverty measure, and trying to make sure we were grounded in the best data and research when we talk about well-being. Then we pressure tested the measures as we captured the costs and resources by going to our lived experience panel and saying, hey, these are what we think typical costs are. This is what we think typical costs are in your area. This is what we think family resources are. And one of the comments that really stood out to me, I believe it was a woman from Atlanta who said, I got a good job, I got an apartment, and I feel like I'm treading water. And people say I should be doing okay, but I don't feel it. And this number tells me why. This speaks to my experience. So we figure that's a pretty good start for capturing the challenges that real families are experiencing and undergirding it with the data. In order to get it more used among policymakers, I will turn it over to Jennifer.
So a key component of this work, it's one thing to have the measure, but it's another thing to actually put it into play and have it be utilized. And the way that we're going about this is centering a lot on socialization and utilization. First and foremost, we've got to help with socialization and utilization, help individuals, policymakers, policy influencers understand that that the nation has to center more on economic security and not simply acute deprivation or basic needs. That every individual, every family in America should have the opportunity to thrive. And when we utilize measures that center simply on acute deprivation, then we're just looking at what people need just to get by. So there's some narrative, ideological shift work that has to be done as part of socialization. We're very much doing that. And then a second component is getting people to actually utilize the measure. When Representative Moore questioned during a congressional hearing the former Secretary of the Treasury about how people would fare under the big, beautiful bill, and she applied the true cost of economic security measure. That's the type of utilization we need. If we linger, if we stay in spaces where we just focus on poverty alone, we are going to look at the needs of the people who are struggling the most. But if we center on economic security, we're going to center on their concerns as well as the concerns of low and middle income Americans who are not being seen. And so it's all about socialization and utilization. It's all about policy influencers, policymakers, everyday persons with lived experience leaning in and talking about economic security and then using this tool. We're doing a lot of articles, a lot of public hearings, a lot of media just to keep getting this word out there. In September, later this month, I should say, we'll be briefing the Congressional Black Caucus about the true cost of economic security measure. We're doing events at universities across the country This is what must be done to get people to buy in and to help people see that they actually are a part of this.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. We are running out of time, and as often happens in really, really good conversations, there's more good questions than time we have to answer. So I want to just sort of quickly say that I dropped the link to the report in the chat so that folks are able to follow that, and we'll also send a follow-up email with the link to this recording and the link to the report so that folks are able to go explore the data and everything else on their own. And then you can also follow up with us if you have specific questions that we weren't able to get to. So I will turn it over, Jennifer, to you to take us home.
I just want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, for leaning in and learning about the true cost of economic security, the measure. You can learn more about it by visiting the National True Cost of Living.org website. You can join the coalition and be a part of this transformative change that is certain to positively impact the lives of individuals and families across America. There are questions that we didn't answer. When we reach out to you and share with you the transcript of the webinar, we'll be certain to make sure we address some of the questions that have gone unanswered. Again, I want to thank everybody for being a part of this afternoon's webinar.